A mysterious craft is found in the depths of the Pacific Ocean. In response, the United States Navy calls in a group of scientists to investigate the incident. The team is taken by helicopter to a ship in the middle of the ocean where they are briefed by Navy Captain Barnes. Barnes explains that they have discovered a spaceship at the bottom of the sea. The reason psychologist Norman was included in the team is an article he wrote years ago about unidentified life forms. The Navy is using this report as a guide. The spaceship is buried beneath a layer of coral approximately 8 meters thick. This indicates that the ship has been there for about 300 years and crashed to Earth in the early 18th century. Because it is suspected that there may still be living beings inside, scientists have been called in to communicate, to learn where these beings came from, and to prevent a possible invasion. Barnes also notes that sonar devices have detected a low-frequency hum coming from the ship, which means that something inside is still operating. As the team prepares to descend into the water, Norman confesses to the mathematician Harry that he actually made up that report. Harry agrees to keep this secret. Then, the scientists board a small submarine to be taken to a structure called the Habitat, which was established by the Navy as a research base. Once they descend deep enough, the team sees the gigantic spaceship with their own eyes and is left in awe. The Navy's diving team prepares a robot to open the doors of the spaceship. Upon this, the scientists leave the Habitat and walk toward the ship. However, when they reach the airlock, they are unable to open the door. So astrophysicist Ted tries to force it open with a hammer and chisel. The attempt doesn't work, but it leaves a small mark on the door. This surprises Harry, because the ship was completely undamaged from the collision, but it can be scratched with simple tools. At that moment, marine biologist Beth notices that heat is radiating from the door. Barnes immediately pulls everyone back, but suddenly, the door opens by itself. When they go inside, Beth sees footprints on the floor. This means that someone has been there before. The team splits into two to scan the area more quickly. When Norman is alone with Beth, he also confesses that his report is fake and that he was actually inspired by science fiction writers. The two step onto a platform that moves on its own. The platform carries them to the upper floor. When Beth sees a corpse sitting in a chair here, she screams. The corpse is human. He died as a result of a blow and is holding a snack called Smokehouse Almonds in his hand. Because of this, they think that the ship is actually an American vessel. Beth is even more surprised when she checks the computer, because the records are written in English. In the flight log, there are dates from the year 43 and a record called Unknown Entry Event. When they select this, a hologram appears around them. A spaceship is entering a black hole. The two share what they have found with the others. Upon this, Barnes shows them the cargo hold, and there they find a massive sphere. Thinking it could be a trap, Barnes decides to install a security camera there. Norman, however, notices something strange. Everyone is looking at the sphere, but no one's reflection appears on its shiny surface. The team returns to the Habitat and starts theorizing. Ted suggests that the ship didn't actually crash, but was caught by the black hole and traveled through time. Just then, news comes from the surface. A violent storm has broken out. That's why they'll need to return soon. Later, in their rooms, Harry tells Norman that he thinks everyone is going to die. He explains that the reason the ship that entered the black hole is listed as unknown in the records is because there was no one left to write a report. Before falling asleep, he says he wishes he could enter the sphere. A few minutes later, an alarm goes off, and when Barnes checks the cameras, he sees Harry walking toward the sphere. Harry's reflection suddenly appears on the sphere, and at that moment, he vanishes. Barnes declares that they won't return to the surface until Harry is found. Upon this, Norman puts on his diving suit and goes back to the spaceship. While carefully watching the sphere, Harry suddenly appears on the floor. His vital signs are normal, but he doesn't wake up. When Norman looks up again, this time he sees his own reflection in the sphere. At that moment, the power goes out and Barnes can't see them. A few seconds later, the power comes back. However, now they are only operating on the internal system. This indicates that the submarine has disappeared and they will have to stay deep for a while longer. While Norman is carrying the unconscious Harry to the Habitat, the maintenance worker Fletcher goes outside to reset the timer on the mini-sub. Barnes explained that this needs to be done every 12 hours, otherwise the mini-sub will automatically surface. On his way back, Fletcher sees a swarm of jellyfish swimming around. At first, the sight looks mesmerizing, but the jellyfish gradually get closer and start sticking to Fletcher's diving suit. Suddenly, he feels the jellyfish entering his suit and tries to escape, but they don't let him go. When water starts leaking into his damaged suit, Fletcher unfortunately drowns. The team brings the body inside. Norman explains that he was attacked by jellyfish as a child and has been afraid of them ever since. When Beth examines them, she realizes she has never seen this type of jellyfish before. After a while, Barnes pulls Norman aside and scolds him for not mentioning Beth's past psychological issues. He has just learned that Beth once attempted suicide. Barnes thinks she could jeopardize the mission. The two start arguing, but just then Ted comes in and announces that Harry has woken up. The team gathers in the kitchen and sees Harry eating with great appetite. Harry surprises everyone by saying that even the simplest food tastes delicious. He also confirms that he entered the sphere, but doesn't explain how he did it. This is also strange because there is no entry point on the sphere. While Harry continues eating, he panics when he finds out it's squid. Ted performs the Heimlich maneuver on him, but Harry says he's not choking, he just doesn't like squid. Shortly after, Barnes calls Ted because of problems with the computer. While they're trying to solve it together, Harry looks at the screen and draws attention to the numbers. He asks Ted to check if it's binary code and to solve it by following the keyboard in a circular pattern to match the sphere. Ted does so, and the result astonishes everyone. Messages from someone named Jerry have appeared on the screen. The mysterious Jerry is only typing simple messages on the screen such as "hello" and "I'm happy." However, Norman worries about what might happen if this entity ever becomes angry. After a while, Norman hears strange banging noises from outside the ship and tries to reach one of the maintenance workers but gets no response. He reports the situation to Barnes. When Barnes checks, he realizes that the worker is outside. Norman and Beth go outside to look for her, but they find that the woman is dead. It turns out the sound was coming from the woman's foot hitting the wall. When Beth examines the body up close, she is horrified to see that the woman's body is crushed and mangled. As Norman and Beth are carrying the body to the station, eggs suddenly start falling from the ceiling. Barnes notices something on the sonar screen and tells the two to hurry up, because the unknown entity is approaching. As soon as they get inside, the entity disappears from the sonar. Later, Barnes and Norman sit down at the computer and discuss how they can communicate with Jerry. But just then, a new message appears on the screen. What is the game plan? This shows that Jerry can hear everything they say. When Jerry stops sending messages, the entity reappears on the sonar and eggs start falling outside the habitat again. Beth says they need to protect the sensor network. Barnes tries to activate the high voltage current, but instead a fire breaks out. Soon, the entity approaches and the team sees that it is a gigantic squid. The monster starts ramming the habitat. The noise it makes doesn't bother Harry at all. He is still sleeping in his room. Meanwhile, Barnes notices that the pressure is dropping and sends Ted to fix it. The moment Ted turns the valve, he is electrocuted, violently thrown against the wall, and loses consciousness. While Norman goes to turn the valve, the squid continues its attack. Barnes orders Norman to reactivate the high voltage. When Norman pulls the lever, the creature suddenly disappears, but at the same time, another fire breaks out in the room. As the team tries to put out the flames, Ted regains consciousness and helps. Meanwhile, the emergency doors begin to close. Barnes wedges a box in the way to prevent the doors from closing. But as he tries to move, the box slips and the door crushes Barnes to death. At the same time, a piece falls from the ceiling and traps Ted. Ted tells Norman to run. The flames spread rapidly. Ted dies in the fire, and then the blaze extinguishes itself. After this, Norman tries to communicate with Jerry and asks who put out the flames. But instead, Jerry asks him, "Did you like the squid?" and explains that he can create more of them. Norman tries to explain that these dreams are killing people, but Jerry's only response is, "Don't call me Jerry anymore." Norman then goes to see Harry. Harry is reading the book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. When Norman mentions the attack, Harry says he slept through the whole thing. He also says that he loves the book he's holding, but he can't read past page 87 because those parts are too scary for him. Norman reminds him of the deaths that have occurred and that most of their oxygen supply has been depleted. However, Harry remains strangely calm. After a while, Beth reminds Norman that they need to reset the timer on the mini submarine. Norman confesses to Beth that he suspects Harry and even thinks that he might be responsible for everything that's happened. That's why he says he'll reset the timer himself and asks Beth to keep an eye on Harry and prevent him from approaching the submarine. Norman goes outside and quickly makes the adjustment, but on his way back, he notices bubbles coming from his diving suit. He immediately calls out to Beth, but it's Harry who answers. Harry says there's a problem with the oxygen connection, but that he can manage anyway. Norman keeps moving forward. When he reaches the ladder, he's suddenly attacked by a snake. A fierce struggle ensues. Then, the creature suddenly disappears. Norman returns to the habitat safely. After a while, the team notices that Beth is heading toward the spaceship and asks her why. Beth explains that she's looking for food because their supplies have run out. However, Harry says there's still plenty of food in the kitchen. Norman gets angry, yells at Beth for not keeping her promise and abandoning her watch, and also reminds her that there's food in the kitchen. This time, Beth checks the fridge and the cupboards and becomes confused, because she's sure she saw them empty before. As Norman continues to scold her, Beth can't take it anymore and accuses Norman of believing Harry instead of her. She also reminds Norman that he still hasn't explained what happened to him inside the sphere. Norman asks if she also went inside the sphere, but Beth leaves the room without saying anything. Then Norman finds Harry's book on the floor. When he looks up, he sees that Harry is still reading the same book. Panicking, Norman opens the kitchen cabinets and finds many copies of the same book inside. This makes him realize that Beth was right. Norman goes to the computer and asks Jerry what happened inside the sphere, but the answer is the same again. Don't call me Jerry. Desperate, Norman examines the codes again and realizes that Ted made some mistakes translating certain letters during the solution. In fact, the entity's real name is Harry, so it is actually Harry himself who has been bringing forth all these strange creatures. Meanwhile, Beth leaves the habitat and plants explosives outside. When she returns, Norman explains the truth to her. In reality, this entity is Harry, and he is the one causing all the creatures that appear around them to manifest. Then he asks Beth to read page 87 of the book. On that page, there is mention of a monster with incredibly long tentacles. The rest of the pages in the book are completely blank. Harry couldn't continue reading the book because he doesn't like squids. After entering the sphere, he gained the power to turn whatever he imagined in his mind into reality. Norman and Beth decide that they need to put Harry into a deep sleep. That way, they will be able to stop his dreams from becoming reality. They find a sedative among the ship's medical supplies. Then, they secretly enter Harry's room. While Norman holds Harry down by force, Beth gives him the injection and Harry passes out. After a while, a message arrives from the surface. They are informed that the weather has cleared and they will be able to return to the surface in 6 hours. Norman goes to the flooded bathroom to brush his teeth. At that moment, a snake hiding in the water slithers into his pants. Norman screams. Beth rushes in and catches the creature. It turns out to be the most venomous snake in the world, and it normally doesn't live in water. Then Beth tells Norman to meet her in the lab. When Norman arrives, Beth locks him inside. She tells him that she was actually the one who created the snakes and explains that he also needs to get an injection. Norman doesn't believe it, but Beth tries to prove her point with examples. It's impossible for the snakes to appear while Harry is asleep. Just like Harry's fear is of the squid, and Norman's fear is of jellyfish. When Norman still resists, Beth starts to drain the oxygen from the room and the laboratory begins to fill with water. Norman stubbornly manages to reach an oxygen tank and then escapes through the emergency exit hatch. While Norman is swimming outside, Beth checks the computer. She finds footage of Barnes expressing doubts about her mental health and Norman scolding him. These recordings make Beth even more uneasy, and she leaves the room. When Norman returns, he hears Beth crying. He tries to comfort her and tells her that both she and he, just like Harry, have entered the sphere. At that moment, Harry also wakes up and demands an explanation. Norman tells the truth. The sphere gives them the power to turn their thoughts into reality. The same thing probably happened to the ship's original crew as well. They too succumbed to their fears and killed each other. Just then, the computer announces that the explosives placed outside the habitat have been activated. They have only 13 minutes left to escape. Beth explains that these explosives were actually brought to break up the coral, but she placed them as a defense against the creatures. At first, she thinks a new creature has activated the explosives, but then she realizes it happened because of her own thoughts. Because in her mind, she is once again contemplating suicide. What makes the situation even worse is Harry's warning. The explosives will completely destroy everything because of the liquid hydrogen on the ship. The team rushes to the mini-submarine, but once inside, they can't get it to start. Suddenly, they find themselves back inside the spaceship. Desperately, they search for a way out, but they keep ending up in the same place. Finally, they stand in front of the sphere, and Norman's reflection tells him, press the button. Realizing what's happening, Norman tells his friends to let go of their thoughts. At that moment, the trio suddenly reappear inside the mini-submarine. Norman presses the button, and the mini-submarine starts up and begins moving toward the surface. They make it just in time, because behind them, the habitat is destroyed in a massive explosion. When the submarine reaches the surface, the team goes through the decompression process and gathers in a private place to talk. They think they can't tell the Navy the truth because no one would believe them. They also assume that the sphere was destroyed in the explosion. Beth reminds them that they still have their powers, but she is afraid of this situation. She says it's because she might accidentally imagine dangerous things or the power could fall into the wrong hands. When Harry responds, Norman is already in the wrong hands. An idea comes to Norman's mind. He says that they should use this power to make themselves forget everything. Thus, it also explains why the incident was recorded as unknown in the ship's flight log. The three of them hold hands and wish to forget everything they experienced on this mission, along with all memories of their powers. At that moment, the sphere rises from the sea and shoots up into the sky at great speed, returning to space. When the scientists open their eyes, they can't remember why they were holding hands.